This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, John Rada back with episode 104 of A Geek Leader Podcast. Today on the show I've got Purdeep Purdeep. He is the host of the Male Entrepreneur Podcast, and today we talk about confidence. We talk about fear of missing out. We talk about self-mastery skills and other leadership advice. We talk about getting your mindset right and taking care of yourself. We talk about transformation psychology. We talk about some of the things that go on when it comes to being healthy and having a healthy mindset and how that evolves into leadership and modeling behavior and all that good stuff. It's a really interesting podcast, so give it up for Purdeep.
Yeah, wow. Loaded question. So
Always.
So in terms of what I'm doing right now, I really work with entrepreneurs and people in leadership roles, whether executives, CEOs, founders, presidents, and really helping them up their game when it comes to their leadership and, more importantly, their self-mastery skills. So the tagline that I have for my business is really master yourself, master life, because that's really what it comes down to. And this really came about through my experience in the corporate world. And I spent 14 years in the corporate world as, I worked my way up and I was executive before I left to start my own firm. But I realized very early on, and even in my teens, I would say, I was at 17, I became a personal trainer and I was helping people really change their lives at that point, that I could give them strategies and tactics, and I could give them basically a blueprint to do something, get results, change your life. But a lot of people were not actually executing. So that really made me wonder, okay, what is it that really differentiates a successful person, a successful entrepreneur or leader versus someone that's not so successful? And that really kind of led me to my quest and where I am today. So if you really want to know where I started from, I grew up on a orchard in a small town in Canada, and my parents were immigrants, and basically I just learned and grew up working hard. I remember being on the orchard, and I would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I would work, depending on the season, till 6 or 7 at night, and that was just kind of the life that I got used to, and I just got used to having to perform and actually work hard to get results. And that was actually a great journey, because it was different than, I think we could say, a lot of us can say that right now. The way we grew up is different than how the generation is growing up today. I grew up waking up to birds, the flowers on the trees blooming, the cherry trees, the apple trees, and I just grew up in a very, what I would call, a mindful environment where there was stress, but just a different kind of stress in life. And that's a lot of the work that I bring into the stuff that I do with entrepreneurs and executives right now, is the mindfulness as well. Because I don't know about you, but there's a lot of people that are feeling stressed out and anxious these days. And especially the ones, it seems like the more success you get, the more anxious you get, the more challenges you have, the more stress you have. So it can be a balance, a very delicate balance at times.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it's one of those things where, at least for me, I'm always like, man, if I had this, I wouldn't be as stressed out. I wouldn't be as, but that's not true. It's the exact opposite. Once you get that, now you've got more to manage and it becomes more stressful.
Exactly.
And, you talked about your upbringing and the fact that, I've got 3 kids, and the world my kids are growing up in is totally different than the world that I grew up in, and totally different than the world my parents grew up in. And there's a quote that I remember that really makes me think. It's I can't remember who said it, but it was, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times.
Yes.
And it's just kind of like that circle of and where we're at in that circle right now. Because right now the times are pretty easy. I mean, nowhere in history has life expectancy and healthcare and the availability of food been as prevalent as it is right now.
Oh, absolutely. And it was interesting. My wife and I we were watching the episode of Game of Thrones the other day, and she looked over and she's like, this is kind of like what real men should be like. And it was funny because her and I have this really interesting conversation. We're both on the same page when it comes to how our relationship works. And you hit on a topic that I'm very passionate about. And that's really the mission that I'm working on right now, is really helping men align themselves so they feel more in control of their life. They have more self-mastery, and therefore they're able to contribute more to their families, their relationship with their spouses, their children, and the community as a whole. Because from what I'm seeing right now, it's kind of a sideline topic here, is a real lack of leadership, and especially in men these days, and not seeing what it should be like in terms of men stepping up. And part of that kind of goes to the backlash right now too, in terms of what it's like to be a man. And in certain ways, it's being frowned upon to have a masculine side, to have that masculinity in you today.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And there are, coming from a tech background, you see it a lot in the tech industries. I mean, one of the topics that I know I've discussed on here before was the James Damore memo from Google, where he tried to use science to talk about the disparity between men and women in tech. But a lot of it, I think, comes down to, like you said, maybe it is a lack of masculinity in some of our leaders. But one of the things I wanted to hit on that you kind of mentioned was self-mastery. And when we talk about leadership, a lot of the books and a lot of the topics always talk about, how you grow other people. But before you can do that, you have to kind of take care of yourself. And I did an episode where I think it was called you put your oxygen mask on first, and that's kind of the idea. You got to take care of yourself first before you can help others. Can you talk a little bit about some of your concepts when you're working with people to develop that self-mastery and how that's important for people before they can lead others?
Yeah, such a great question and topic. And I just kind of fell into this because when I first started my business and I was helping entrepreneurs and executives, it really started off trying to help them grow their department, their division, sales, revenues, create high-performing teams. And I realized that 80% of the work that I was doing was actually helping the individual, the leader, with their self-mastery skills, because they didn't have the insight when it comes to what I call your internal energy, your life energy, your thoughts, your brain and your thoughts, as well as your emotions. And when you get those three pieces aligned, you actually become a stronger person, you become a stronger leader. But it's tough to lead others. It's tough to tell others what to do and show them how to do if you're not able to master yourself. That's really what it comes down to. And so if you want, the easiest way to get people to change and actually get results is actually to model that yourself and actually be that leader that people are automatically attracted to. That is the most important thing, and that's the easiest way to shift behavior and get results rather than try to force it upon them. I'm a big believer in processes and accountability and responsibility in business. That's my background, is business operations. But in order to do that, you have to have more. You have to get people inspired. You have to get people to think of a greater purpose and a greater meaning for what they're doing today. And if you don't have that in yourself, it's hard to get other people to that level. So the other part to that is, you touched on it, there's a lot of talk today about self-mastery. Actually, not so much about self-mastery, but mindset. Mindset is a big hot topic these days, and there's tons and dozens of books on mindset, but no one really shows you how to change your mindset. People talk about change your perspective on things, your life will change, think positively, things will get better, but no one really gives you a system. And I put myself on a mission over the last decade to really figure out, okay, what is it in the neuroscience, the psychology, and what I call the traditional mindfulness, where can we take that from a system perspective to actually help people from a checklist? If someone were to say, how do you master yourself? It'd be hard for someone to say that. So that's where I've kind of developed what I call a 10-point or 9-point checklist for people to really go through and say, okay, am I doing this? Yes or no. If you're not, then you need to work on that. If you are, then you move on to the next point. And it focuses on three particular areas. And we could jump into this if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, I totally agree. I think your mindset is very important when it comes to leadership. And I think it was Angela, I can't remember her name. She wrote a book called Mindsets that I've talked about on the show before. Yes. But So what are those three areas?
Well, the first one is your life energy. And I think you could take a look at this from two perspectives, from a science perspective, quantum physics perspective, or you could take a look at it from a spirituality perspective. Is that there is an energy that is greater than who we are as human beings. And that's been proven by quantum physics, that 99.9% of human beings, the way we're built and the way we're made up, is actually just space and energy. So when you think about that, that's pretty phenomenal, that the majority of our being is really just space and energy. So what does that tell us? that tells us in order to function effectively in life and actually be a high performer, to create change and actually make an impact and get results, it's about creating more energy. So that's why some people feel lethargic at times and you're not able to get stuff done. What happens when you don't have enough energy? You don't get the results you want. You don't put in the commitment. You don't put in the dedication. You're not as passionate. So having that energy is important. And there's three factors that really play into that energy. And the first one is what I call the here and now. And most people, especially leaders, especially go-getters and high performers, you're always thinking about the future. So if we take a look at it from a management perspective or an executive perspective, what's your role? Your role is to make sure that that company, that division, the department is successful going forward, right? Mm-hmm. And so people are constantly thinking about, what do I need to do next? What do I need to do in the next week, the next 6 months? Or they're thinking about stuff that happened in the past. Okay, let's not screw up like we did before, right? Let's not make those mistakes. Let's do better than we did. But very few people actually live their day in the here and now. And if you don't live your day in the here and now, in this very moment, because that's the only thing we have right now. Science has proven there's no such thing as the future or the past. The only time it actually exists or place it exists is in our head. And here's a simple question I'd like to use, and it's an easy analogy. Is I can ask you and say, well, or maybe I will. Can you hit a baseball tomorrow, or can you hit a baseball yesterday?
No.
You can't, right? You can only hit a baseball in this moment. And that's why so many people, if you sit down and you actually think about that, you realize that the only time you have power is in this present moment.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Because you can't control what happens tomorrow per se. I mean, you can plan for it, but there's always things that can occur that, derail your plans. And you obviously can't go back and change the past.
No, you can't. But where's 80% of our attention? It's
past
typically in the
future.
past, future. It's never. So what does that do? It automatically dilutes your energy. So if you can be more present, be focused on what you're doing today. And that's why, I know we were talking about the audience here today, and a lot of you are probably in the tech world, is technology today is actually one of the drivers in taking people away from the present moment. And it's actually, if you take a look at social media, if you take a look at whether it's AI or machine learning in terms of the abilities that we have to use technology, it's easy for people to think about the future. It's easy for people to get distracted and take away from the present moment. And that's actually impacting people. There's a lot of studies now and research that has proven that each generation, there's a higher level of anxiety, stress, depression, other disorders. And it's directly and indirectly tied to technology as well. That's one of the factors. But more and more people are feeling alone today. So that's just one component, is really being present in the here and now. If you can do that, if you can focus more time, energy in the present moment, you're going to be a lot more effective as a leader. The second part is really understanding. This is where we go into a different dynamic, the feminine force versus the masculine force. And this is where things get a little bit touchy for people, because human beings, as a man, you have both masculine force in you and you have a feminine force. As a female, you have a masculine force and a feminine force. Most people don't understand these forces, and most people actually misconstrue and actually overlap the feminine force versus being a female. They're actually two different things, because as a man, you have both the masculine force and the feminine force. The masculine force is very driven. It's very strong. It's very still. It's very goal-oriented. And it's really about getting stuff done. And the feminine force is really about connection. It's about nurturing. It's about flow. It's about creativity. Those are two polar opposites. I could talk about this all day, because a lot of people, one of the challenges that I see is relationship challenges. And a lot of the relationship challenges that they have, whether it's their intimate relationship or relationship with their coworkers, whatever, really comes down to the energy or the forces that they're trying to use. And so as a leader, you have to understand which force to use when. Right? If you're put your head down and you're focused on a task, you have to use more of your masculine force. If you're trying to connect with people, you have to use more of your feminine force. And what's happened in society today as leaders and roles, and this is something that's become actually more and more prominent, is that men are being trained to be more in their feminine force. and women are being trained to be more in their masculine force. But what ends up happening is if you put too much of a feminine force in a man, then you take the man out of the man. You take the masculinity away. And that's exactly what makes a man a man. If you do the same thing with a woman, if you put too much masculine in a woman, she doesn't have the femininity that she wants. And this happens very often in relationships. So it's having that balance and knowing when to use that force, because whether you're a male or you're female, you can use your forces and leverage them more effectively. And I'll just use a specific example from my corporate world and I studied this very thoroughly in terms of our executive teams that I had worked with in the past and the ones that I continue to work with, is that when I was looking and seeing the effectiveness of leaders, and I noticed who was being more effective, and I looked particularly in the female roles, I noticed that the women that were what I would say expressing more of their masculine force were not as effective, because they were using their masculine force to go against the masculine force, which wasn't working very well for them. But the women that were more in their feminine, more naturally in their feminine force, in terms of more creativity, more nurturing, they were actually more effective. People responded to them better. People looked at their opinions from a different perspective. And so it was very interesting. And when I would talk and interview these executives, I found out that the women that were more in their masculine were not comfortable in that state. They felt like they had to put on a show just to be around that table with a bunch of men, for example. When I talked to the women that were working with men around the table, but were more in their feminine force, they felt more comfortable. They felt like they were able to be themselves and therefore be able to contribute more. And actually, people responded to them better. So it's very interesting to see the dynamics of that. I guess my whole point there is to know the balance, because as a human being, you know when you're not being true to yourself, right?
Yeah. So, question about that: was there any questions like ask about how comfortable you are portraying this or not, or is it? I mean, is everybody the same? Does everybody have an equal amount, or is it some men are obviously more feminine than others, and some are more masculine. Some are more masculine than others, and some women are more feminine and more masculine than others as well. Where is that balance, and how do you find it?
Yeah, it's a total scale. Let's just put it that way. And everybody is different. And what I'm talking about is mainly from a heterosexual perspective. For men that have a preference for other men, for example, that varies as well. So they may have more feminine energy in them. So it just depends on the person. And that's why it's important to really differentiate the masculine and feminine force versus male and female, or man or woman, because it really does differ. It's a great question. Everybody has a different level of energy. The important thing, though, is for a heterosexual male, you need to have more masculine force in you. As a heterosexual female, you need to have more feminine, because that balances, especially in an intimate relationship.
Okay, yeah, I get that. And what was the third area?
Well, the third area is really focus. And so, is your focus. And that's really where you put your attention. Mm-hmm. So are you putting your attention in what I call an empowering state or a disempowering state? So an empowering state would be something like a singular focus. Are you focused on one particular task at a time? And the best analogy I can use is most people live like an octopus right now. You have your tentacles in 10 or 15 different areas. And what does that do? That takes your attention span in 10 or 15 different areas. Well, from a neuroscience perspective, there's no way your brain functions effectively like that. Your brain actually just switches between tasks, and that takes away from your efficiency and your effectiveness. So if you want to be more effective, you want to empower yourself, focus on single tasks, or if you're going to multitask, do it for simple things like if you're going for a jog and listening to music, for example, right? But I've seen people trying to type, listen to music, and they have their smartphone right next to them as well. They're checking messages. That actually throws your energy completely off. And so having empowering thoughts versus disempowering thoughts, so singular versus multiple, are you focused on possibility versus limitations? Are you looking at your life as through the eyes of being the master or being a victim? So these are all different ways of perceiving your attention and focusing your attention. Are you thinking about positive things or are you thinking about negative things? Because wherever you put your focus, that's exactly where your energy goes.
So it's almost like I like to think about. I always go back to the sun as kind of being the biggest force of energy that we have, kind of on our planet, and you can focus that energy in different ways. You can put a filter that blocks out certain types of sunlight. You can put a magnifying glass to focus it on one point to cause a fire. And I like to think about my focus usually with those different filters in place. How can having a positive filter or a different perspective you put on that energy affect the outcome or the performance that you have?
Oh, well, it's simple. So if you have a positive outcome versus a negative impact outcome, that's where your energy goes. So if you think about, are you thinking about a nice ocean, beachfront, whatever that may be, or are you thinking about a swamp? And if you take a look at that, your performance level is going to be different. It is absolutely different. It just from a neuroscience perspective, the more negative thoughts you think, it's almost like your brain is less efficient. You're taking up more energy. And that's what ends up happening because your brain actually consumes about 20% of your daily calorie intake or your energy throughout your day. If you're thinking about negative thoughts, let's just say 20% of the day, well, you only have 80% of the energy left for positive thinking, for things that actually will take you towards your goals. So that's really how it works in terms of positive or negative.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. One thing that I also want to talk about when it goes back to the self-mastery kind of skill set is confidence. One of the things that I've seen a lot when it comes to tech leaders, and a lot of our audience are team leads or beginning their careers, wanting to be leaders, is a struggle sometimes with confidence and having the ability to maybe not second guess themselves as much and to come off confident when they're saying something or when they're in a meeting. And that kind of leads their career path, because if you're always hesitant or not confident in your choices or your decisions when you're in front of people and having those meetings, sometimes people perceive you in a certain way and they'll take less stock in your thoughts and your decisions and the things that you say. So what are some things that people can do to enhance their confidence level?
Yeah, and it's a great question. So first of all, I want to point out that confidence is actually, when you take a look at overall performance, confidence is actually anywhere between 16 to 20% of actually getting to your goal. It's from that perspective. But it's the most important part. It's if you don't have the confidence to get to your goal, you're not going to get to your goal. So understand that. That's the first piece. And before you talk about confidence, I think people have to understand that to get confidence, you also have to have a level of self-esteem. Mm-hmm. That is the most important thing, because if you don't have self-esteem, you're going to have a tough time trying to build up your confidence. And the difference in terms of self-esteem is really just self-appreciation, self-love. Do you appreciate yourself? Do you think you're worthy of what you're trying to get out of life? And surprisingly, most people don't think that way. Most people don't think, even though I've worked with very successful entrepreneurs making a lot of money, and a lot of them do not have the self-esteem because they don't think that they're worthy of love, for example, from their spouse or their children. They're not worthy of some other aspect. They have the money, they have everything else, but they don't have the self-esteem. Something, whether they've done something in the past, whether they've wronged somebody, or they've made some mistakes, they've really taken away from their self-love. And that is the most important thing to remember, is that focus on your self-esteem first. When you build that up, you can build up your self-confidence. Now, getting into self-confidence, there's actually 4 ways that have been proven to increase your self-confidence. And the first one, so if you take a look at how self-confidence is created in the first place, it's really through experiencing something and then doing well and actually executing it. And then eventually you become a master. So what ends up happening is you build self-confidence based on past experiences. That's how self-confidence works. The better you are at doing something and the more you accomplish, the better the higher the level of self-confidence that you create, right? So that's a simple cycle, right? So the easiest way to do it is small wins. Is if you have a big task in front of you, if you break them up into smaller tasks and actually execute on them, then you're actually going to slowly build up your confidence over time. And what ends up happening is why people don't have self-confidence is they're looking at the entire big picture, right? They're saying, oh my God, I got to do this. I got to go out in front of 1,000 people and I got to speak. Well, that's okay. But have you ever been in front of one person that had to speak?
Of course.
Right? So you think of that, you bring that image back in, and then you take that and you actually use those emotions. You take yourself back to that state where you did, and you actually feel a lot better. And you actually create some confidence based on that. So that's the first part. The second is really modeling. And modeling is really taking a look at other people's accomplishments. So you look at other people that may be in a similar situation and say, if that person has accomplished that, so can I. And what did they do to accomplish that? Okay, they did that, so that will build my self-confidence. So you just take strategies from other people, and that's a second way that you can actually increase your self-confidence, is just by modeling other people. And you can also visualize by seeing other people and seeing what they do, and you take that and you put yourself in their shoes and you visualize yourself doing the exact same thing. That improves your confidence level as well. The third one is really your words, and it's what is called verbal persuasion. And verbal persuasion is basically self-talk, what you tell yourself. So people like to have affirmations, for example. If you tell yourself I can do this, I can do this, I can go out there and give an awesome speech in front of 1,000 people. The key is to actually make it very precise. This I can do this thing is great, but you got to take it one step further and say, okay, what is it exactly that you want to accomplish? So when you do that, you can actually take yourself one step closer to self-confidence as well. And the last component and the fourth factor, is really your physiological state, meaning that you have to put your body in the state of confidence. And so if you're hunched over and your head is down, for example, that's a state of not being confident. That's either a state of depression or worry, anxiety, whatever it may be. So put yourself in a state of confidence. And whether that's so there's a number of positions, like putting your feet up on your desk, for example, is a state of confidence. Standing up and putting your chest out, put your fists on your hips and kind of doing the Superman pose. That's actually been shown by research. If you do that for 2 minutes, it'll actually boost up your testosterone levels and actually improve your confidence. So your physiological state absolutely is critical for your level of confidence as well. So if you work on those 4 components, you'll slowly, or even automatically, depending on how good you are, you can actually boost your confidence level significantly.
Yeah, one of the tips that I have when it comes to physical state is I try, whenever I'm going to a meeting where maybe I'm a little bit hesitant or something, I try to walk faster going there. And I found if I just walk a little bit faster, moving towards that meeting, then it almost gives me the energy like, yeah, I want to be there. I feel confident now that I'm there because I walked a little bit faster going to it. I don't know how that works, but somehow it works for me.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah, exactly. So the thing is, do whatever works for you because every person is different.
Yeah, and the small wins, I think that's a great way to build momentum. I know, like for me, whenever I started running, the first time I was like, well, I just want to make it down to this stop sign. If I can make it to the stop sign, I'll be happy. And then when I got to that stop sign, I was like, okay, now that I've gone this far, I can take 30 more seconds before I walk, and just building that momentum and knowing that I can go a little bit further and a little bit further and getting that confidence that, oh yeah, I was able to do that, so surely I can do this. And it just made me, become a better runner, which I think in turn helps build up confidence in that activity. But you can take that to anything. You can take it to coding, to development, to talking in front of people.
Yes, exactly.
So what are some other key components or tips that you would have for new leaders to help them when it comes to just being a better leader for their team, after they've kind of, maybe they've worked on themselves some, they've become a little bit more confident, they've, got their mindset in the right way, they're starting to think about the positive sides of their goals and the things they're working out. What are some other tips that they can have to be a better leader?
Oh, well, the simple thing is really understand emotions. Because part of self-mastery is not just your thought. Actually, as I mentioned, there's 3 components to your self-mastery. The first one is your energy. The second is your thoughts, which there's a number of factors in there as well. Mm-hmm. But the most important thing is your emotions. And if you understand how emotions work, your own emotions, and how other people's emotions work, you are going to be a far more effective leader. And this is something that they really don't teach in the corporate world. I know people talk about emotional intelligence, but this is taking it to a completely different level. There's a book out there called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. Mm-hmm. The work that's actually out there when it comes to the science behind emotions is that like an emotional intelligence 30.0. It's a completely different level. And that's the work that I do with leaders, is really showing them how to sharpen their skills with emotion. Because when you understand that, you not only become your self-control is a completely different level, but how you interact with other individuals. Every word, every interaction that you have with another individual becomes that much more potent in terms of the results that you want. You can actually make a stronger and a better difference when you understand how emotions work. You can become a better marketer, you will become a better leader, you will make more sales, because everything comes down to emotions. That's how the brain works. Your brain is designed to work on two things, feelings and emotions.
Well, yeah, I totally get that. Like when I'm buying something, I don't always buy the most practical thing. I buy the thing that makes me feel good, or the emotional buy.
Exactly, and that's what it is, and that's why it's brilliant for people to understand how emotions work, because it's almost borderline, and I call it's almost a borderline manipulative if you can understand this, because your intentions have to be good. If you understand the science behind it, you can actually get people to do things, and you can get people to do things and want to do things and actually perform way better. That is the most important thing, but you have to have their best intentions at heart.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And, I've seen that in many different ways when it comes to, if you can, and I try to call it tactical empathy. If you can kind of relate to someone's on an empathetic level, you can, definitely motivate them and lead them in a way that, as long as it's for the good, because it's really, it doesn't work out, at least not for the long term, if you are manipulative. But if you're motivating them to better themselves and to better their goals and their to take them down that path that they need, that they want to be at, you can definitely get a lot more done when you take that empathetic approach.
Exactly.
So what are some ways that people can find out more about you? Maybe they're interested in getting some coaching or some leadership training. How can they reach out to you and find out more about the things that you're doing? Maybe talk a little bit about your podcast as well while we're talking about this.
Yeah, sure. So the podcast is called The Male Entrepreneur, and it's specifically for men that want more from life. And I call it, it's really a mindful crusade, because it's really about creating stronger men with self-mastery skills and leaders in and around this world that actually can make a positive impact. So that's and we just talk about day-to-day stuff. And it's really the stuff that guys think about but don't really want to talk about. And it's more from a perspective of everyday life stuff that can make your life better. You can also go to themaleentrepreneur.com. I have a bunch of information on there. I'm very excited because I'm launching a program that I use with my one-on-one clients, which is very expensive, but I've actually broken it down into an online program that I'm offering for basically the men out there to really help them sharpen the skills. And interesting, it's called 360 Abundance. Mm-hmm. And it's really to help them create abundance in all aspects of their life. And it's all about self-mastery. So we go through a bunch of modules. It's 12 weeks long. And at the end of the day, whoever's taking it is going to come out a completely different person. It's all about transformation. You can take a look at 360abundance.com. If you're interested, there is a requirement for you to actually go through, and I have a free online training. It's 75 minutes long. It's free. And at the end of that, if you choose to want to go into the program, great. If you're not, take the knowledge that's in that program and run with it, because it will change your life.
All right. Yeah, definitely. I'm going to link that up in the show notes, as well as your website and your podcast and Twitter and all those other good things. So one quick last tip that you have for leaders out there right before we call it a day.
Oh, yeah. One quick tip. I think the easiest thing, and I know I've said this before, but the easiest thing is, as leaders, as executive, as department managers, division managers, the default thing that you fall to is strategies and tactics. Mm-hmm. That is the default thing. But remember, strategy and tactics will not work if you don't execute on it effectively. And execution is the most important thing. And execution comes down to one thing. It's all about self-mastery. It's all about how you think, how you feel, and basically the level of energy that you have. So if you do that, and I'm saying this from experience and through research and working with some of the best entrepreneurs, businesses out there, that these skills will far outweigh any other tactic or strategy that you can work on or focus on.
I think that's great. And again, I'm going to link all this stuff in the show notes. Thanks for your time. Thanks for coming on, and thanks for talking about this. I think it's an important skill that people need to, if they want to be better leaders, they definitely have to work on themselves for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show.